Our dean walked into the cafeteria handcuffed and asked, "Which student sent the files to the police? I need to know who betrayed me." Dean Gregory Thorne stood in the cafeteria entrance flanked by two police detectives, his wrists bound in steel cuffs that caught the fluorescent lights. His charcoal suit was rumpled and his silk tie hung loose around his neck. A thin line of sweat ran down his temple despite the October cold outside. The entire senior class was assembled for our weekly college prep lunch session when the doors burst open and he appeared. Everyone froze mid-conversation, forks suspended over trays, phones halting mid-scroll. I was sitting with my best friend Zara near the windows when it happened. Dean Thorne's eyes swept across the room with something between desperation and rage. His normally perfect silver hair was disheveled and his face carried the gray pallor of someone whose world had just collapsed. "I know one of you did this," he continued, his voice cracking. "I need to understand why. After everything I've done for this school, for your futures, you stabbed me in the back." The taller detective, a woman with dark hair pulled tight, touched his shoulder. "Mr. Thorne, we need to keep moving." But he jerked away from her, taking 2 steps into the cafeteria. "Tell me which one of you sent those files. The financial records, the transcripts, the emails. Someone here has been stealing from my office for months. I want to know who." Nobody spoke. 300 students sat in absolute silence, the only sound coming from the kitchen where staff had stopped working to watch. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs because I knew exactly what files he meant. Zara's hand found mine under the table and squeezed hard enough to hurt. We'd spent 6 months collecting those files, scanning documents after hours, copying emails from unsecured computers, building a case that would bring down the most prestigious private academy in the state. Dean Thorne had built Ridgemont Academy's reputation on academic excellence and guaranteed college admissions. Parents paid $50,000 annually in tuition, plus substantial donations, to ensure their children attended top universities. What they didn't know was that Dean Thorne had turned college admissions into an auction. Students who couldn't meet academic standards got admitted anyway if their parents paid enough. Transcripts were falsified, test scores were altered, and scholarship funds meant for underprivileged students were diverted to cover the fraud. Zara and I discovered it by accident 3 months into our senior year when we were called to the dean's office about our financial aid packages. We were both scholarship students, full rides based on academic merit and financial need. The academy loved parading us around during fundraising events, proof that they supported diversity and opportunity. That day in November, Dean Thorne had been apologetic, but firm. "I'm afraid there's been a significant error in the scholarship allocation this year. The board made some difficult decisions about fund distribution. Your packages are being reduced by 75%. I remembered staring at him in disbelief. "Reduced? I can't afford tuition without that scholarship. Neither can Zara." He'd spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "I understand your disappointment, but the funds simply aren't available. Perhaps you could consider transferring to public school for your senior year. I'd be happy to write recommendation letters." Zara had stood up, her voice shaking. "The scholarship gala last month raised over $2 million. I saw the total on the screens during your speech. Where did that money go?" Dean Thorne's expression had shifted, becoming colder. "Financial details are not your concern. The decision is final." We'd left his office knowing something was catastrophically wrong. $2 million raised specifically for scholarships, and suddenly there was no money. That night, Zara and I started digging. We began with the financial aid office, where Mrs. Keller worked as administrator. She was a kind woman in her 60s who'd always advocated for scholarship students. We asked her directly about the missing funds during office hours one afternoon. Mrs. Keller had gone pale and glanced at her closed door before whispering, "I've been trying to understand it myself. The donations came in, but the allocations don't match. Money keeps disappearing into discretionary accounts I don't have access to." She'd pulled up her computer screen and showed us the discrepancies. Donations clearly marked for scholarship funds being transferred to accounts labeled operational expenses or administrative discretion. When we asked who controlled those accounts, she'd said Dean Thorne's name like an apology. I raised concerns with the board, but Dean Thorne told them I was confused about the accounting structures. He's been here 20 years. They trust him completely. That was when we decided to investigate properly. Zara was brilliant with technology, a coding prodigy who'd been recruited by 3 universities for computer science programs she could no longer afford. I was better with people, able to ask questions without raising suspicion, comfortable navigating social dynamics. Together, we started mapping the financial irregularities, but we quickly discovered the scholarship theft was only the beginning. The real corruption went much deeper. Dean Thorne had been selling college admissions for years. Parents of academically struggling students paid enormous bribes disguised as donations, and in return, their children's transcripts were altered to show grades they never earned. Test scores were changed in the system. Teacher recommendations were rewritten or forged entirely. These falsified records were then sent to universities along with Dean Thorne's personal endorsements, leveraging Ridgemont's elite reputation to secure acceptances the students didn't deserve. We discovered the truth when Zara hacked into the school's secure server using credentials she'd obtained through careful social engineering. The files we found were damning. Spreadsheets tracking payments from parents with corresponding admissions guarantees. before and after versions of transcripts showing grade changes, emails between Dean Thorne and parents discussing specific universities and required donation amounts. One email from a parent had read, "Will $300,000 guarantee Princeton? My daughter's GPA is currently 2.8, but your reputation could make the difference." Dean Thorne's response had been clinical. "Princeton requires more substantial investment given their admission standards. For guaranteed consideration, I recommend $500,000. I'll personally reach out to their admissions office with enhanced transcripts and a compelling narrative about her leadership potential and academic trajectory." We found dozens of similar exchanges, parents paying hundreds of thousands for admissions to top schools, students who'd failed classes suddenly showing straight A's on their transcripts, scholarship money being funneled into Dean Thorne's discretionary accounts to cover the fraud and enrich himself personally. The scope was staggering. Over 8 years, Dean Thorne had stolen nearly $12 million in scholarship funds and collected millions more in bribes. He'd sent hundreds of unqualified students to prestigious universities based on fabricated credentials. Zara and I spent 2 months collecting everything. We copied financial records, downloaded emails, photographed documents when digital access wasn't possible. We documented every falsified transcript we could find, every bribe, every stolen scholarship dollar. We worked carefully, never accessing the same files twice from the same location, never discussing it anywhere we might be overheard. We knew if Dean Thorne discovered what we were doing, he'd destroy the evidence and bury us. When we finally had everything compiled, we faced a decision about what to do with it. Going to the school board seemed pointless since they'd already ignored Mrs. Keller's concerns. Going to parents would alert Dean Thorne before any real investigation could happen. We needed someone with actual authority who couldn't be influenced by Ridgemont's wealthy donors. That's when we decided on the police, specifically the Financial Crimes Unit, along with the State Education Department and the FBI, since the scheme involved wire fraud and crossed state lines. We also sent copies to the local newspaper, knowing that public exposure would make it impossible to sweep under the rug. We'd mailed everything anonymously from a post office 2 towns over, using a prepaid phone to send accompanying emails with detailed explanations. Then we'd waited. 3 weeks had passed before anything happened. We'd started to worry the evidence had been ignored or lost. Then this morning, police cars appeared in the Ridgemont parking lot. Detectives entered the administrative building during first period. By lunch, rumors were spreading that Dean Thorne had been arrested. Now here he stood in handcuffs, asking who betrayed him, as if stealing from students and defrauding universities was somehow acceptable and turning him in was the crime. The detective's voice cut through the silence. "Mr. Thorne, you need to come with us. Now." But Dean Thorne wasn't finished. His eyes landed on the scholarship students scattered throughout the cafeteria. We were easy to identify, the handful of students who didn't arrive in luxury cars or wear designer clothes, who worked campus jobs and packed lunches instead of buying from the gourmet cafeteria line. "Was it you?" He pointed at Jerome, a junior on full scholarship. Jerome shook his head, looking terrified. "Or you?" His finger swung to Aisha, another scholarship recipient. "One of you ungrateful kids who got everything handed to you decided to destroy the institution that gave you opportunity." Zara stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loud against the floor. "You stole our scholarships. You took money donated specifically to help students who needed it and used it to cover up your crimes." The cafeteria erupted in whispers. Dean Thorne's face contorted. "I built this school's reputation. Every student here benefits from the prestige I created. Sometimes difficult decisions must be made to maintain excellence." I stood up beside Zara, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "You falsified transcripts and sold college admissions to rich families. You sent students to universities they weren't qualified for based on fake grades and forged documents. That's not maintaining excellence. That's fraud." Dean Thorne's attention snapped to me. "Miss Rivera, of course. You've been nothing but trouble since you arrived here. I should have known you'd be involved." The detective intervened, pulling Dean Thorne back toward the door. "We're leaving. Say nothing else." But Dean Thorne wasn't capable of staying quiet. His carefully constructed world was collapsing, and he needed to regain control. "Do you understand what you've done? Ridgemont Academy's reputation is everything. Parents trust us with their children's futures. Universities trust our recommendations. You've destroyed decades of relationships over petty jealousy about scholarship allocations." Zara's voice was ice. "We sent the police transcripts showing students with Fs that you changed to As. We sent them emails where you promised parents guaranteed admissions for money. We sent them financial records showing you stole millions in scholarship donations. That's not petty jealousy. That's evidence of crimes." The room had gone completely still. Every student was staring, phones out now recording everything. Dean Thorne seemed to notice the phones for the first time, and his face paled further. "Turn those off. Recording on school grounds without permission violates school policy." Nobody moved. The shorter detective, a man with graying temples, spoke firmly. "School policy doesn't apply when someone's been arrested. These students have every right to document this." He looked at Dean Thorne with undisguised contempt. "You took advantage of your position to enrich yourself and manipulate college admissions. You stole from scholarship students who trusted this institution. You've earned everything coming to you. Dean Thorne tried to jerk away from them, but the handcuffs limited his movement. Those files are school property. They're confidential. Whoever took them committed theft. I want them prosecuted. I felt Zara tense beside me, but I kept my voice steady. The files are evidence of your crimes. Whistleblower protections apply. Dean Thorne's laugh was bitter. Whistleblower protections? You're high school students. You broke into administrative offices and stole private documents. That's burglary. The female detective had apparently reached her limit. Mr. Thorne, you're making this worse for yourself. Every word you say is being recorded by dozens of students. Your lawyer would tell you to shut up immediately. But Dean Thorne couldn't stop. 8 years of unchallenged authority had convinced him he was untouchable. I want to know who else was involved. Someone helped you access those servers. Mrs. Keller? Did she give you passwords? I'll make sure she's prosecuted too. Mrs. Keller's voice came from the cafeteria entrance where she'd been standing with other staff. I didn't help anyone, Gregory, but I wish I had. I've watched you steal from students for 3 years. I raised concerns and you threatened my job. I'm glad someone finally had the courage to expose you. More staff were gathering now, clustering near the entrance. Mr. Valdez, who taught history, spoke up. We've all noticed the grade changes. Students who failed assignments suddenly passing with perfect scores. When we questioned it, you said it was administrative correction of grading errors. We didn't realize you were altering transcripts for money. Dean Thorne's face had gone from pale to flushed. You have no idea what you're talking about. Those corrections were legitimate. Sometimes teachers grade too harshly. I was protecting students' futures. Miss Okafor, the chemistry teacher, pushed forward. I gave Charlotte Westbrook an F in honors chemistry. She missed half the semester and failed every exam. Her transcript shows an A. I never changed that grade. You did. More teachers started speaking up, describing similar incidents. Students whose failing grades mysteriously became passing scores. Test results that didn't match actual performance. Recommendation letters they never wrote appearing in college applications. The full scope of Dean Thorne's operation was unraveling in real time as people realized it was finally safe to speak. And I could see the exact moment Dean Thorne understood he'd lost. His shoulders sagged and the righteous anger drained from his expression, replaced by something closer to panic. You don't understand the pressure. Parents demand results. The board demands top college acceptances. Universities expect certain standards from Ridgemont students. I was managing expectations, maintaining relationships. Everything I did was for this school's reputation. Zara's voice cut through his justifications. You bought yourself a vacation home in Aspen with stolen scholarship money. We found the purchase records. You weren't managing expectations. You were getting rich while students who actually earned scholarships lost their funding. Dean Thorne's eyes widened. How did you? He stopped, realizing he was confirming the accusation. The detective pulled him firmly toward the exit. We're done here. You can explain everything to your lawyer and the district attorney. As they led him away, Dean Thorne looked back one more time. This won't stand. My attorney will have those files suppressed. The evidence was obtained illegally. Everything will be thrown out. But we'd been careful about that too. Everything we'd sent to authorities had been obtained from areas students had legitimate access to. School computers in public labs, documents left in recycling bins, emails sent to student accounts. Nothing required breaking and entering or illegal hacking. Zara had made sure every piece of evidence we collected could be legally defended. The cafeteria doors closed behind Dean Thorne and the detectives. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the room exploded into chaos. Students were shouting questions, demanding explanations, recording statements for social media. Teachers were gathering in confused clusters, trying to understand what they'd just witnessed. I felt Zara grab my arm and pull me toward the exit. We need to leave before anyone else figures out it was us. We made it halfway to the door before Principal Alvarez appeared, blocking our path. She was Dean Thorne's second in command, a thin woman in her 50s who'd always seemed intimidated by him. Her face was unreadable. Miss Rivera, Miss Chen, my office. Now. My stomach dropped. Zara had warned me we might face consequences even if we'd acted to expose crimes. Schools didn't like students who caused trouble, even justified trouble. We followed Principal Alvarez through hallways that seemed longer than usual, passing classrooms where students pressed against windows to watch. Word was spreading fast. By the time we reached the administrative building, my phone was buzzing constantly with texts. The principal's office felt smaller than I remembered. She gestured for us to sit, then closed the door and pulled the blinds. My heart was racing. This was it. We'd brought down the dean, but now we'd face expulsion or criminal charges or both. Principal Alvarez sat behind her desk and folded her hands. I've suspected something was wrong for 2 years. Grade changes that didn't make sense. Financial irregularities I couldn't explain. Parents making substantial donations followed immediately by their children's acceptance to elite universities. But Dean Thorne controlled everything. The board trusted him completely. I had no proof and no authority to investigate. She paused, looking at us directly. When the police arrived this morning with a warrant, they showed me some of the evidence. Bank records, emails, falsified transcripts. They said an anonymous source had provided everything. That source was you two, wasn't it? I exchanged glances with Zara, unsure how to respond. Principal Alvarez leaned forward. I'm not asking so I can punish you. I'm asking because I need to thank you. Dean Thorne's actions have damaged this institution's integrity for years. Students who earned their achievements had them devalued. Universities trusted our recommendations and received unqualified students. Scholarship donors believed their money was helping deserving kids, not funding Dean Thorne's lifestyle. What you did was extraordinarily brave. The relief was so intense I felt dizzy. We couldn't let him keep stealing. Zara and I would have lost our scholarships completely. Other students would have lost theirs too, and the fraud just kept getting bigger. Principal Alvarez nodded. The state education department is launching a full investigation. They'll audit every transcript, every college recommendation, every financial transaction for the past 8 years. This school will likely face severe sanctions. We might lose our accreditation temporarily. Zara spoke quietly. Students who got into college based on fake transcripts will have their admissions revoked. Some are already enrolled. This is going to destroy people who had nothing to do with the scheme. It was something we discussed extensively before sending the evidence. Innocent students would suffer consequences because their parents had paid bribes they might not have known about. But letting the fraud continue meant more victims, more stolen scholarships, more unqualified students taking spots from deserving applicants. There wasn't a clean solution. Principal Alvarez sighed. Yes, it will be devastating. But the alternative was allowing corruption to continue indefinitely. You made the right choice even though it was an impossible one. She pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. This arrived from the state education department an hour ago. They're conducting emergency scholarship fund audits across all private schools in the state. Every dollar donated for scholarships in the past decade will be traced and accounted for. At Ridgemont, that means recovering the money Dean Thorne stole and redistributing it to the students who should have received it originally. I opened the folder and scanned the letter inside. The state was mandating immediate restoration of all scholarship funds, plus penalties and interest. Students who'd lost funding would have it restored retroactively. Does this mean our scholarships are reinstated? Principal Alvarez smiled slightly. It means Dean Thorne's theft is being reversed. Your full scholarship packages will be restored, plus compensation for the emotional distress his actions caused. The weight I'd been carrying for months lifted slightly. We'd done this to expose corruption, but the practical reality was that Zara and I needed those scholarships. Without them, we'd lose our senior year and our college opportunities. Knowing they'd be restored made the risks we'd taken feel more worthwhile. My phone buzzed again and I glanced at the screen. News alerts. The story was already breaking on local news channels. Private school dean arrested for financial fraud and college admissions scheme. Millions stolen from scholarship funds. I showed the screen to Principal Alvarez. She nodded grimly. It's going to be a media circus. Reporters are already gathering outside. Parents will be calling demanding answers. The board will likely schedule an emergency meeting tonight. She looked at us seriously. You two need to decide how public you want to be. The police and prosecutors will protect your identities as minors and whistleblowers, but students will figure it out if they haven't already. Some families will be grateful. Others, especially those whose children benefited from the fraud, will be angry. Zara and I had discussed this too. Staying anonymous was safer, but it felt cowardly. We'd started this to protect vulnerable students and expose injustice. Hiding afterwards seemed wrong. We'll talk to reporters if they ask, I said. People deserve to know why this happened and who was hurt. Principal Alvarez stood up. Then I'll arrange a press conference for later today. The school needs to address this publicly, and having victims speak will help people understand the human cost. She paused at the door. One more thing. Dean Thorne had an assistant, Daniel Frost. He handled much of the day-to-day financial operations. The police arrested him this morning too. They're investigating whether other staff members were involved. The name sent a chill through me. Daniel Frost was in his 30s, ambitious, always immaculately dressed. He'd been Dean Thorne's shadow for 3 years, the person who actually processed the grade changes and financial transfers. If he'd been arrested, it meant prosecutors believed he was a knowing participant, not just someone following orders. We left the principal's office and found the hallway packed with students. Everyone wanted information, wanted to know what happened, wanted to understand how deep the corruption ran. Jerome pushed through the crowd toward us. Is it true? Dean Thorne was taking bribes? I nodded. He was changing grades and selling college admissions. Rich parents paid hundreds of thousands to get their kids into elite schools they didn't qualify for. A girl named Charlotte pushed forward, her face pale. My mom donated $300,000 to the school last year. I got into Brown. Are you saying my acceptance was because of money, not my grades? The cafeteria confrontation was still echoing in my mind. Miss Okafor had specifically mentioned Charlotte's chemistry grade being changed. Did you earn an A in honors chemistry? Charlotte hesitated. I don't know. I struggled in that class, but my transcript shows an A. The realization was dawning on her face. My acceptance letter is fake. I didn't actually earn it. Other students were having similar realizations, checking their transcripts on phones, remembering large donations their parents made before college acceptances arrived. The privilege that had protected them was suddenly a source of shame. Zara addressed the growing crowd. If your parents made large donations and you got into schools you weren't qualified for, your acceptance was probably bought. The evidence shows Dean Thorne sold admissions for 8 years. Dozens of students are affected. A boy named Preston, whose father was a prominent lawyer, spoke up angrily. You're destroying people's lives over this. So what if some parents made donations? That's how private schools work. Alumni give money and their kids get advantages. That's not illegal. I felt anger surge. Your father didn't just donate money. He paid a bribe for Dean Thorne to falsify your transcript and forge teacher recommendations. That is illegal. It's fraud. And it meant qualified students didn't get those spots because unqualified students bought them. Preston's face flushed. You're just jealous because your families can't afford to compete. This is about poor kids being bitter that rich kids have advantages. Zara stepped forward, her voice deadly calm. This is about Dean Thorne stealing $2 million in scholarship money that was donated specifically to help students who couldn't afford tuition. Money your family and others gave was supposed to fund merit scholarships. Instead, it went into Dean Thorne's bank account and was used to cover up the admissions fraud, so your privilege actively harmed the students who needed help most. The crowd had gone quiet. Preston seemed to realize he'd said something indefensible but couldn't back down. My father's lawyer will prove none of this holds up in court. Dean Thorne will be cleared and you'll be expelled for theft and defamation. Jerome laughed without humor. There are bank records and emails. Your father wrote to Dean Thorne asking for guaranteed Princeton admission and offering $500,000. That email is now evidence in a federal investigation. Good luck claiming it's defamation when it's literally documented. More students were arriving, packing the hallway until movement became difficult. Teachers tried to restore order, but nobody was listening. Everyone wanted information, wanted to understand how much of their education had been a lie. Mrs. Keller appeared, looking exhausted and relieved simultaneously. She pulled Zara and me aside. The police want statements from both of you. They're setting up in the conference room. You'll need to walk them through how you obtained the evidence and explain the timeline. We followed her to the conference room where the two detectives who'd arrested Dean Thorne were waiting along with two others I didn't recognize. The female detective introduced herself as Detective Paulson. We've been investigating financial irregularities at private schools for 6 months. Dean Thorne's operation is the largest we've found. The evidence you provided is comprehensive and damning. We need you to explain exactly how you obtained it so we can ensure it's admissible in court. For the next 2 hours, Zara and I walked them through our investigation. We explained discovering the scholarship theft, Mrs. Keller's concerns about missing funds, our decision to look deeper. We described accessing school computers using our student credentials, finding emails in Dean Thorne's inbox that he'd failed to delete, discovering financial records in recycling bins, taking photographs of documents left unsecured in offices. Everything we'd done had been technically within student access rights or involved information that wasn't properly secured. Detective Paulson took detailed notes. You never broke into locked offices? Never hacked password-protected systems? Zara shook her head. We used school computers anyone could access. Dean Thorne's email was open on a lab computer one day and we scrolled through it. Documents we photographed were in unlocked filing cabinets in the financial aid office where we worked as student assistants. We didn't break into anything. The detective looked satisfied. That's important. Defense attorneys will argue the evidence was illegally obtained, but if you had legitimate access to the locations and systems, that argument fails. She pulled out a printed spreadsheet. This document shows 8 years of payments from parents with corresponding student names and target universities. Where did you find this? I remembered that file specifically. Dean Thorne's office computer. He left it unlocked while he went to a board meeting. We were delivering papers from Mrs. Keller and saw the screen. We took photos with our phones. The shorter detective, who'd introduced himself as Detective Barnes, looked impressed. You two conducted a more thorough investigation than most professional auditors. This evidence is meticulously organized. Zara had spent weeks compiling everything into a coherent narrative with cross-reference documents and clear timelines. She'd organized it knowing it needed to be accessible for people unfamiliar with Ridgemont's systems. We knew if we were going to expose this, we needed to make it impossible to dismiss or ignore. We needed overwhelming evidence that told the complete story. Detective Paulson closed her notebook. You succeeded. The district attorney is preparing charges for wire fraud, financial fraud, theft, and conspiracy. Dean Thorne is looking at significant prison time. Daniel Frost, his assistant, is cooperating and providing additional evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence. That was interesting. What's Frost saying? Detective Barnes hesitated, then decided we deserved to know. He's claiming Dean Thorne threatened his job if he didn't process the fraudulent transactions. He says he kept personal copies of everything as insurance in case he needed to prove coercion. Those copies corroborate your evidence and fill in gaps we didn't have. So Frost had been collecting evidence too, presumably to protect himself. It made sense. Working that closely with fraud that obvious, he'd want documentation proving he was following orders rather than acting independently. The detectives asked more questions about specific documents and transactions. They wanted to understand the full scope and identify every victim. When they mentioned victims, I realized they meant both the scholarship students who lost funding and the universities that accepted unqualified students based on fraudulent applications. By the time we finished, it was almost 3 p.m. School had descended into chaos. Normal classes had been abandoned. Students gathered in groups discussing the scandal, sharing information, trying to understand who'd been affected. Parents were arriving, some to pick up their children, others to demand answers from administrators. The parking lot was full of news vans. Principal Alvarez found us outside the conference room. The board has scheduled an emergency meeting for 6 p.m. tonight. They want you both to attend and present your findings directly. Zara looked nervous. What if the board is angry we exposed this? Dean Thorne was their hire. They trusted him. Principal Alvarez's expression was grim. Some board members will be defensive. Others will be furious that this happened under their watch. But they need to hear from you. They need to understand how a 17-year-old student uncovered fraud their oversight committees missed. The press conference happened at 4 p.m. in the school's main auditorium. Principal Alvarez gave a statement acknowledging the investigation and promising full cooperation with authorities. Then she introduced Zara and me. Walking onto that stage in front of dozens of reporters and cameras felt surreal. I'd spent months working in secret, careful to avoid detection. Now I was voluntarily stepping into the spotlight. Zara spoke first, explaining how we'd discovered the scholarship theft and what it meant for students who relied on that funding. My family can't afford Ridgemont's tuition. I'm here because I earned a full merit scholarship. When Dean Thorne tried to take that away without explanation, I knew something was wrong. Digging deeper, we found a massive fraud scheme that had stolen millions from students who needed help most. I followed, describing the college admissions fraud and its impact. Dean Thorne sold college acceptances to families who could pay, then falsified student records to make unqualified applicants look impressive. This harmed qualified students who deserved those spots and damaged relationships between Ridgemont and universities that trusted our recommendations. The questions came fast. How long had we been investigating? How many students were affected? What would happen to students already enrolled in college based on false transcripts? Did we have proof of everything we'd alleged? We answered as honestly as we could. Yes, we had proof, all provided to authorities. Dozens of students were affected over 8 years. Students currently enrolled might have admissions revoked depending on how universities chose to respond. We'd investigated for 6 months before gathering enough evidence to act. A reporter from the state newspaper asked the question I'd been dreading. Did you consider the consequences for innocent students whose parents paid bribes they might not have known about? Students who will now lose college acceptances and face public humiliation? I took a breath before answering. Yes, we thought about it constantly. But Dean Thorne's fraud was escalating. Every year, more scholarship money was stolen, more unqualified students were sent to universities, more qualified students lost opportunities they'd earned. Letting it continue would have harmed even more people. There wasn't a choice that didn't hurt someone. We chose the option that stopped the harm from growing. The reporter persisted. But students like Charlotte Westbrook, who had no idea her chemistry grade was changed or that her mother's donation was a bribe, will suffer consequences for actions she didn't commit. How do you justify that? Zara answered this time. We don't justify it. It's a tragedy. But Charlotte's acceptance to Brown meant another student who actually earned that spot didn't get it. That student is a victim too. The difference is Charlotte has resources and support to recover from this. The scholarship students Dean Thorne stole from don't have those resources. They would have lost everything silently while the fraud continued. It was a harsh truth, but accurate. The students who'd benefited from the fraud had wealthy families and safety nets. The scholarship students had nothing. If we hadn't exposed the scheme, we'd have been the ones suffering in silence. After an hour, Principal Alvarez ended the press conference. Zara and I left through a back exit to avoid the crowd, but students found us anyway. Some wanted to thank us, scholarship recipients who'd also had funding reduced or eliminated. Others were angry, children of wealthy donors who felt we'd destroyed their futures out of jealousy. Jerome walked with us to the parking lot. Half the senior class is panicking about college acceptances being revoked. The other half is trying to figure out if they were affected. It's chaos. He paused. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. My scholarship was reduced by 60% last month. Dean Thorne told my mom it was a budgeting issue. I was going to have to drop out. Now I know he stole that money to cover his fraud. Aisha joined us, her eyes red from crying. My sister was a student here 4 years ago, full scholarship. Dean Thorne cut her funding her senior year, and she had to transfer to public school. She lost all her AP credits and didn't get into her top college choices. I always wondered why the school would do that to someone who'd earned their spot. Now I know. He needed the money to pay for his crimes. More scholarship students shared similar stories. Funding mysteriously reduced or eliminated. Students forced to transfer or take out massive loans. Families struggling to understand why promised support had vanished. Each story reinforced that exposing Dean Thorne had been necessary, even with the collateral damage to wealthy students who'd unknowingly benefited. The board meeting at 6 p.m. was tense. 12 board members sat around a conference table looking angry and exhausted. Several had clearly been crying. Board President Amanda Fletcher, a lawyer whose daughter had graduated from Ridgemont 5 years earlier, called the meeting to order. We're here to discuss the allegations against Dean Thorne and determine how this institution moves forward. Ms. Rivera and Ms. Chen, please present your findings. Zara and I walked them through everything again, showing documents on the conference room screen, explaining the timeline and scope of the fraud. Several board members looked sick as they absorbed the details. When we finished, Fletcher spoke carefully. You've presented evidence of systematic fraud occurring under this board's oversight. That represents a catastrophic failure on our part. We trusted Dean Thorne's reports and didn't implement adequate oversight mechanisms. One board member, a businessman named Gerald Northrup, interrupted. We trusted him because he delivered results. College acceptance rates increased every year. Donations grew. The school's reputation reached new heights. How were we supposed to know he was fabricating those results? I couldn't stay quiet. Mrs. Keller told you something was wrong. 3 years ago, she reported financial irregularities and concerns about missing scholarship funds. Dean Thorne dismissed her as confused, and you believed him instead of investigating. Fletcher looked at Mrs. Keller, who was sitting along the wall. Is that accurate? Mrs. Keller stood up. Yes, I brought concerns to 3 board members over 2 years. I was told Dean Thorne's financial management was sound and I should stop making trouble. One member threatened to support firing me if I continued questioning administrative decisions. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Fletcher's face hardened. Who told you that? Mrs. Keller pointed to Northrup. You did, in your office. You said questioning Dean Thorne's judgment showed poor understanding of how elite institutions operated, and I should focus on my administrative duties. Northrup went red. That's taken out of context. You were making serious accusations without evidence. Mrs. Keller's voice rose. I had evidence. Financial reports showing donations not appearing in scholarship accounts. I brought you spreadsheets. You didn't want to see them because investigating would have been complicated and might have damaged the school's reputation. The room erupted in arguments. Board members accusing each other of negligence, of prioritizing reputation over integrity, of enabling fraud through willful ignorance. Fletcher pounded her gavel. Enough. We can assign blame later. Right now, we need to determine how to move forward. The school faces potential loss of accreditation, lawsuits from affected families, criminal investigations, and complete collapse of our reputation. Another board member, a professor named Linda Yates, spoke up. We need to take immediate action to demonstrate accountability, starting with the board. Everyone who ignored warnings or failed to implement proper oversight should resign, including me. We allowed this to happen through negligence, if not malice. Several members protested, but Yates continued. We also need to immediately restore all scholarship funds with interest and penalties. Every student Dean Thorne harmed deserves full compensation. That includes students who were forced to transfer or who lost opportunities because wealthy students bought their spots. Fletcher nodded slowly. The state is already mandating scholarship restoration. But you're right that we should go further. Financial compensation for affected families, tuition assistance for students who had to transfer, enhanced oversight mechanisms going forward. She looked at Zara and me. What would you want to see happen? You uncovered this. What does accountability look like from your perspective? I'd thought about this question for months. Independent oversight of all financial operations. No more discretionary accounts controlled by a single administrator. Public transparency about donations and scholarship distributions. Anonymous reporting systems for students and staff to raise concerns without retaliation. And actual consequences for people who ignored warnings. Board members who dismissed Mrs. Keller's concerns should resign. Zara added. The students who got into college based on fraud need to face consequences too. I know they're victims of their parents' decisions, but they benefited from a system that harmed others. They should lose those acceptances and have to earn admission legitimately. Otherwise, we're saying wealthy students can cheat without consequences as long as their parents handle the bribes. It was the harshest position we'd taken, but it felt necessary. Letting wealthy students keep fraudulent acceptances while scholarship students suffered would perpetuate the exact inequality we'd fought against. Northrup stood up angrily. You're talking about destroying young people's futures. These students didn't ask their parents to pay bribes. Punishing them is cruel. I met his eyes. Dean Thorne destroyed futures too. He stole from scholarship students who'd earned their spots. He took opportunities from qualified applicants who deserved them. Those victims' futures matter too. The difference is they didn't benefit from fraud. The wealthy students did, even if unintentionally. Fletcher intervened before the argument could escalate. The board will take all recommendations under consideration. We're meeting with attorneys tomorrow to discuss legal exposure and appropriate remediation. In the meantime, this board's immediate actions are as follows. Dean Thorne is terminated effective immediately. His assistant, Daniel Frost, is also terminated. Any staff members found to have knowledge of the fraud will be investigated and potentially terminated. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in my leadership. I failed in my oversight duties and should resign. The vote was 7-5 in favor of her resignation. Fletcher accepted it with visible relief. Professor Yates, you'll serve as interim board president. I recommend immediately hiring an independent auditor to review all school financial operations for the past decade. Make everything public. Transparency is our only path back to credibility. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, establishing committees to investigate different aspects of the fraud, making plans to communicate with affected families, and drafting policies to prevent future corruption. By the time Zara and I left, it was after 9 p.m. The campus was dark and empty, news vans gone, students and staff departed. We sat on the front steps looking at the building that had been our second home for years. We did this. Zara said quietly. We tore down the whole system. I leaned back against the cold stone. The system was already corrupt. We just exposed it. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom asking if I was okay. I'd called her earlier to explain what happened, and she'd been shocked and proud simultaneously. She wanted me home soon to talk about everything. Zara's phone buzzed too. We compared messages and laughed despite the exhaustion. Both our families wanted us home immediately, worried about our safety and well-being after publicly challenging powerful people. Should we be worried? Zara asked. About retaliation from families we exposed? I considered it. Maybe, but the evidence is public now. The investigations are official. Hurting us wouldn't stop anything. Still, we walked to our cars together, careful and alert. The parking lot felt exposed under the security lights. Nothing happened. We drove home separately, texting to confirm we'd both arrived safely. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying Dean Thorne's face when he'd asked who betrayed him, as if stealing from students and defrauding universities was acceptable and exposing him was treachery. The next morning, news coverage was everywhere. National outlets picked up the story. Private school dean arrested for multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Students expose massive college admissions scandal. Wealthy families paid bribes for fake transcripts and guaranteed acceptances. The comment sections were vicious, split between people praising us for exposing corruption and others claiming we'd destroyed innocent lives out of jealousy. By the end of the week, 3 board members had resigned. 5 staff members who'd processed fraudulent grade changes were suspended pending investigation. The state education department announced a comprehensive audit of all private schools in the region. Ridgemont's accreditation was temporarily suspended, while investigators reviewed every transcript and financial transaction for 8 years. Universities started reaching out to Ridgemont students, requesting additional documentation to verify transcripts. Several schools announced they were rescinding acceptances pending investigation. Charlotte Westbrook's acceptance to Brown was revoked. Preston's admission to Princeton was under review. Dozens of other students faced similar situations. Their parents hired lawyers, threatened lawsuits, claimed their children were being punished for crimes they didn't commit. But the universities stood firm. Accepting students based on fraudulent records damaged their institutional integrity. The acceptances had been obtained through fraud and were therefore void. Some of the affected students reached out to apologize. Charlotte sent me a long email explaining she genuinely believed she'd earned her grades and hadn't known about her mother's donation being a bribe. She was devastated and embarrassed, but understood why her acceptance had been revoked. Others remained angry, insisting we'd destroyed their futures and should have found a way to expose Dean Thorne without harming innocent students. I sympathized with their pain but couldn't accept the premise. They'd benefited from a corrupt system. Correcting that corruption meant they lost unearned advantages. That wasn't punishment. It was restoration of fairness. Dean Thorne's trial began 8 months later. The evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors presented the documents Zara and I had collected along with additional evidence Daniel Frost had provided and financial records subpoenaed from banks. Testimony from victims detailed how scholarship funds had been cut or eliminated without explanation. Universities described accepting students based on Ridgemont's reputation, only to discover those students were unprepared for college-level work. The defense tried arguing Dean Thorne had acted to benefit the school, that his methods were unorthodox, but motivated by institutional loyalty. The jury didn't buy it. They convicted him on 17 counts of fraud, theft, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison and ordered restitution of $14 million to victims. Daniel Frost received a reduced sentence of 3 years for his cooperation. Several board members faced civil lawsuits from families whose scholarship funds had been stolen. Ridgemont Academy eventually regained its accreditation after implementing comprehensive reforms, but enrollment dropped significantly. Many wealthy families withdrew their children, uncomfortable with the scrutiny and oversight. The school's character changed, becoming more academically focused and less oriented toward prestige. Scholarship programs were expanded and funded transparently. Zara and I graduated with full restored scholarships plus additional compensation for the stress Dean Thorne's actions had caused. We both got into our top college choices based on our actual grades and achievements. No bribes required, no transcripts falsified, just genuine earned success. Years later, I became an investigative journalist focusing on institutional corruption and educational fraud. The experience at Ridgemont taught me that systems protect themselves until someone forces transparency. Zara became a cybersecurity specialist working with law enforcement to investigate financial crimes. We stayed close, bound by shared experience of dismantling corruption and facing the consequences. Sometimes people ask if we regret exposing the fraud, given the harm it caused to students who'd benefited unknowingly. The answer is complicated. I regret that innocent people suffered. I regret that Charlotte and others had their futures disrupted through no fault of their own. But I don't regret stopping Dean Thorne. The fraud was escalating. More students would have been hurt. More qualified applicants would have lost opportunities they'd earned. Letting corruption continue because fixing it would be painful isn't justice. It's cowardice. Dean Thorne walked into that cafeteria asking who betrayed him, handcuffed and desperate, unable to understand that theft and fraud were betrayals of every student he'd sworn to serve. We didn't betray him. We held him accountable. And given the choice again, knowing all the consequences and complications, I'd make the same decision without hesitation. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.